Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know everyone's time is valuable, and I want to be very respectful of everyone's time. So welcome to a webinar entitled Make Simple Things Simple. So we're going to talk today about enabling business processes with SharePoint, Office 365, combined with K2 workflow and smart forms. Just kind of a couple of house cleaning items. So everyone is on mute, and in your GoToWebinar panel, you should see a questions tab as well as a chat tab. So please feel free to interact via questions or chat, and we will certainly answer those as we go through the webinar topics and as well at the end. So our topics today include a discussion of Office 365, and I'm going to kind of demo a sample site that we have, which is a tour of our intranet features, and really kind of a discussion of where we can add value in terms of what our employees might want from an intranet, from an interactive intranet. Then we'll get into some specific business processes and some that we have built using K2 Appit. And we'll discuss and go through an employee onboarding process and a discussion of a new project startup process. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. But again, just to reiterate, we absolutely love your questions as we're going through the webinar. You have the questions tab and also the chat tab. And myself or some of our panelists can certainly answer those questions as we're going through the topics, especially when they're valuable to the entire discussion. So my name's Dr. Melissa Fraser, and I am the Collaboration Practice Lead for Valore Partners, and we're here in Tempe, Arizona. So I've been with Valore for 7 years, and I've actually worked with SharePoint since the very beginning of the product. I don't know if any of you recall when SharePoint first started out, it actually had Exchange Server as its data storage rather than SQL Server. And it was pretty challenging, and I think over the years it has certainly become much better and much more easy to deal with from a solution perspective and developer perspective. And then when you couple SharePoint with tools like K2, the value proposition gets even better and better. You know, kind of as a fun note about me, I like the outdoors. I like to glamp. I don't camp, I glamp. And I actually do try to fish, and I don't really catch anything, but I think it's going to be pretty fun when I do. I'm looking forward to it. It's a bucket list item for me. So let's talk a little bit about SharePoint in general, and specifically Office 365. So to describe SharePoint, it's unlike describing a vertical application. It's not an application that does accounting. It's not an application that does payroll. It's not anything like that. It's a strategic application that that drives business value, and there's a lot of services that are provided that you don't have to build from scratch if you're trying to, let's say for example, you're trying to build a way for employees to view their human resources documents. Well, security, search, and storage are already provided for you, and so considering a tool like SharePoint, you're already getting value by not having to roll those services your own. In our experience of implementing many different intranets, the key to successful implementation is really getting down to specific business needs, solving those business needs using SharePoint, and then continuing to build on the success of that. What ends up happening is IT will get together with the department, for example, and it always seems to be human resources. Human resources always seems to be kind of the leading group with a need for something like SharePoint. So we use SharePoint to deliver benefit information, for example, or to provide workflows for human resource related activities. Everyone needs human resources, yet we're all busy professionals. Our jobs really don't revolve around looking at our benefits or trying to go on vacation or trying to interact with human resources directly. So if human resources can provide, the professional workers with services that are easy to use, then it just makes everything better. It keeps everything more productive. Ease of use, assurance that a desired result is achieved, and security are very, very important. For IT, the discussion of ROI comes into play because you want to ensure that with your investment in SharePoint and your investment in your intranet that people are actually using it. So are people using the internet? Am I saving money from time-consuming processes? Am I gaining visibility into my operational effectiveness? And so we'll see some SharePoint-related tools that might help you to, get some ideas about how we might be able to, establish those ROI baselines and really get some value out of investing in Office 365. So as I mentioned, with many of our intranet engagements, we start with HR. We might move on to teams like IT. We might move on to teams like marketing. And these are really the drivers of the intranet interactive features as well as content. So again, what we're trying to do is drive employee engagement. And this comes in way of a two-way channel of communication. So with Office 365, social features are a key component of new Office 365 features, and this really drives two-way communication with employees. It's not someone who is just displaying information, but now as an employee I can comment on that information, I can comment on my peers, I can provide feedback to my organization, and it helps me feel more engaged. A channel for idea sharing, again with some of the social features for SharePoint Office 365, I can use my sites, for example, to discuss my capabilities within the organization. I can list my hobbies and so on and so forth. One of the funny stories of one of the organizations in the past is that of locating Toastmaster members within the organization. Because the Toastmasters for that particular organization were a very active group, and using my sites within SharePoint at the time, even now we could also use Yammer for that type of activity, but using the social features within intranet, it made it very easy for organizational folks to find Toastmasters in the various locations of the company. It was a simple example, but for that particular organization it added a tremendous amount of value because now you have a peer-to-peer connection that you couldn't get to before. And again, with the employee self-service, all the HR activities should be made easy. I can go and I can find my benefits information very easily. I can download and read the latest employee handbook very easily. It doesn't really require me to send an email or do a tremendous amount of searching because everything that I need as an employee of the company is right there for me. Same thing with IT. I need some assistance so that I can, get back to work and I can interact with IT very, very easily. So these are some of the business processes that are, that are important and are the simple things that really should be simple for employees. So as I mentioned, we have a little SharePoint environment that I'll have us take a look at and just kind of talk about maybe, again, just kind of some ideas as providing content and information that's valuable to our employees. So I kind of approach this as, a day in the life. So this is a day in the life of me. So I get up in the morning, I, drink my 44 cups of coffee. Well, not that many, but I drink my cups of coffee. And I not only want to catch up on my social news, but I also want to catch up on my company news. So my company has certainly rolled out a portal, and the marketing department takes care of sending company news, which is important for me to get started on my day. Well, I see it here on my desktop, which is all fine and dandy. I don't know about you, but usually if I'm sitting down watching the news or looking at Facebook, I'm not doing it on my desktop. I'm doing it on my mobile device. And so with SharePoint, you can use something like, well, you can use one of the frameworks like Bootstrap, which is what this is, to provide the information in a mobile-friendly view. So I can now see the news stories. They're a little condensed, but they're all still here in the content roll-up. I can also see that my menu is collapsed into the mobile view rather than the desktop view. But again, just one of the values that SharePoint can provide along with a existing framework, now you have a mobile view that users can get their daily news very easily, you know, sitting on the couch, drinking their morning coffee, and can get started off in the day correctly. Once I get into the office, there's some other things that I can take a look at. So for example, under my performance, we've integrated some Power BI, and I can see the sales for the previous day, or I can see kind of the sales trends for the week and what have you. It'll take a second to pop up, but so you can combine SharePoint with tools like Power BI to get a sense of analytics for the organization for any part of topics that you are interested in. And I can see my chart view, and I can see, you know, my sales amount, my product cost, so I can see my level of profitability there. I can see discount amounts that I've been providing. Again, product cost, sales amount trends, and I can see it by region, for example. Also, Power BI allows me to filter the information. So maybe I'm just kind of taking a historical view, filter for 2012, and you can see that the charts are now sending me information and data for 2012. So another tool that we can provide that just kind of gives a transparent view to organizational effectiveness across the company. It's all right there in the intranet. It's not a, I'm going to share the latest Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to share, you know, a morning email that has the information, you know, so on and so forth. You can just present it right here within SharePoint. The other kind of getting work done for real is, I'll talk a little bit about project management in SharePoint. And this particular display shows SharePoint project management kind of light. I'm going to call it project management light because it does give us the ability to manage tasks. And so from here, I can see my task view right here in a Gantt chart. And this was whatever my project manager came up for our particular project, which happened to be an Azure, SQL Azure migration. So these were the tasks that were put in my project plan. I've highlighted several of those tasks to the timeline view, the timeline summary. I can also see a summary of what is coming up, what might be slipping, and this will also display for me any items on my project calendar. So as I scroll down a little bit further, I can see my calendar view, which includes maybe team meetings. It can also include milestones or whatever I deem as important in the project calendar, and combine that with all of my project documentation. And you'll notice that these are all categorized by my life cycle. So I've got a closeout document, some execution documents, some control documents, and some planning documents. So really, project management in terms of SharePoint without Project Server does allow you to manage tasks and timelines. Where it's going to fall short is it's going to fall short in terms of managing budget, perhaps, and really kind of the resource leveling types of things that happen on more sophisticated project sites. I think it's a great view. I think this is a really nice view that allows you to really see the health of the project in a pretty concise timeline. I also combine this particular page with a pie chart, which happens to be a Google app. And so I wrote a little Google app that takes my project task list and shows me I've got 16 tasks in progress. I have 2 tasks completed. And so if I go over to my task list And let's say I update one of my tasks. I'll take this guy here and I'll mark it as completed. And when I go back to the home page and take a look at my Google app, that shows me kind of my overall status. Now I have 15 in progress and 3 completed. And so there's a lot going on here in terms of the capabilities of Office 365. We're taking great advantage of a lot of the built-in features. So all of these views, the Gantt chart view, the project summary view, the task list view, those are all built into SharePoint, Office 365. The overall tracking is some client-side script, which interacts with the Google Chart API, which is a public API. And that gives us the pie chart for completion. The calendar view is a default view. Here we've taken our document library and we've added metadata to it. And that way I can see very easily my documents in terms of what phase they relate to for my project. So if I only want to see my budget, for example, it might be under here with monitoring and control. There's my cost budget document or documents. And I can drill right down through those. So if you compare something like that organization versus the shared drive that I see in most organizations, it's much easier to find information based on meaningful tags rather than a crazy folder hierarchy that is very difficult to navigate and to traverse. It's one of the biggest requests that we get from companies is how can I find things in my shared drive? And so once we start having the discussion of organization of content using metadata, it's a great value add. It's a really great value add. So the easy should be easy. And this is where you can start to evaluate, whether you're a business owner or an IT professional, you'll have some stake in the organization, and you can start to look at your processes and say, how can I make this easier and make the organization, just make everybody happier? If all you do is make everyone a little bit happier at work, that's a great accomplishment. So evaluating our current processes, are they easy to explain? Well, if they're difficult to explain, or if they contain the phrase, wait for so-and-so to send you an email, then it's probably something to take a look at and re-engineer. Are my employees frustrated even once? Well, that's one too many, because now instead of, writing my code, or instead of, doing my real work, doing my billable work, then I'm, futzing around looking for a document, or I'm, waiting for somebody to get back to me via email. Does the process include the word print or mail? Can I see trends or patterns based on instances? So one of the things in terms of organizational effectiveness, if I have an IT help desk, can I see any types of performance metrics around the IT help desk? And the answer may be no. The answer may be yes. Well, the answer may be yes, and I invested in this really expensive software to try to accomplish that. So that's one of the benefits of what we're talking about today is, Office 365 and SharePoint provide a great layer to enable all of these processes. K2 forms and workflows provide us with the back-end logic to really help not only developers and IT professionals, but even power users with some of the more simple workflows that they may have within their own departments, to really enable those to give you that whole life cycle. It's easy for employees to submit for this particular item. It's easy for me to approve it. And now I can go back and I can look and I can see, how fast are these, how fast is this workflow occurring? Kind of what are the results? Am I approving a lot? Am I declining a lot? Whatever the metrics are that you're tracking. In terms of getting started, picking off the low-hanging fruit. I would like to be reimbursed for my business trip. So it should be very easy to submit an expense report. And again, the process really shouldn't involve the word print or email or put in an interoffice envelope or any of those types of phrases. We can build a workflow and forms to submit the entire thing online. You know, I would like to go to Aruba for a week. Aruba seems really nice. Again, it's a vacation request. So I want to submit for my vacation request, and I know I have the hours. It should be an easy thing for me to be excited about planning my vacation. My computer needs a repair, and I promise I didn't spill coffee on it, of course. So if my computer's not working, I'm not getting anything done. So again, a very quick way to interact with the IT folks and get the repair that I need or get a replacement that I need, again, is kind of one of those low-hanging fruit items that I can, you know, submit very quickly and get back on with my day. And like I say, the easy should also be manageable for IT as well. So we're going to go into this last bullet point, which is my first day with the organization. You never get a chance for a first impression. So this is actually something that we use here at Valore Partners. So we use K2 Appit, which is what we're going to see today, and it's workflow apps, no-code designers, smart forms, workflows, interact with other systems if we need to, and so on and so forth. So we've partnered with K2 to ensure that our own consultants are educated and certified, and we use it within our own organization, and you're going to see that here in just a minute. Let me talk about K2 Appit for just a second. So K2 Appit is a hosted, in the SharePoint store on your online environment or in your on-prem environment. So you can have your Office 365 new subscription, existing subscription, or hosted on-prem. And I'll go through kind of showing where that's enabled on your site. Super intuitive. The thing about K2 is, the nice thing about K2, and if any of you have worked with SharePoint 2013 on-prem versus SharePoint 2013, well, it's not 2013, but SharePoint Office 365, you'll know that the capabilities are quite different in terms of SharePoint itself. But the nice thing is with the K2 Appit piece that the capabilities are exactly the same between the environments. So you don't have a watered down list of features if you're working with Office 365. So typically, the way that the app works, or what they look like, is we set up our SharePoint list of information, or it could be multiple lists. So we set up our SharePoint list or lists of information. So we get that all organized. And in terms of a Appit workflow or a K2 workflow, that first screen you're seeing there is a filterable, searchable central task list. So what that means is take an out-of-the-box SharePoint workflow. Let's say, for example, it's the out-of-the-box approval workflow. Really didn't do anything other than say, here's who gets the approval. Well, to kind of see where that approval stands, I set up the document library, for example, with the approval workflow. I'm submitting documents, the workflows are running. If I want to see the status of an individual workflow, then I have to go to the list, and I have to go to the settings for the list and go to the workflow settings, and I can kind of see what's in progress. If I want to see anything for me, then I go to the associated task list, and then I filter that list by, what's applicable to me, and so on and so forth. At the very least, hopefully whomever set up that workflow put the task list on the same page with the documents, maybe, to make it a little bit easier, but oftentimes it's 2 or 3 steps away. With the K2 workflow, we have a task list which is automatically filtered to be my task, so I can see exactly for which documents what I am responsible for. And if you have a workflow that has, many different steps to it, which we'll see here in a minute, that's very valuable because I can go to I call it a dashboard. I can go to my workflow dashboard right away and I can see exactly what I'm responsible for, and I can act on that information very, very quickly, as we'll see in the demo. The mobile view for the workflow processing, for the task list, et cetera, is right there for you. So again, I receive an email via my Office 365 on my iPhone, and I can go right to the task list and I can approve it, decline it, whatever the action is, right there from my mobile device, and that's all from right in K2. The reports out of the box, which we'll see as well, so I can see exactly how many workflows I have in process, how many workflows I've completed, for example, what is the average time that these things are taking to complete. And this is huge. Let's if you compare this particular process to the usual document approval process, which is you email the document to 10 people, those 10 people put their comments and email it back to you. So now you have 20 copies of that document in your exchange. No one's comments are merged together. So now you have to take the time to merge those comments together. And at the end of the day, it probably took you weeks and weeks and weeks, but you can't even tell. You just know it took a long time. So with an approval process that's enabled with a workflow, you can see exactly how long it's taking you, exactly how many things you have to respond to, and the work list makes it very easy to respond to those sorts of things in a quick fashion. So I do want to talk to you about the workflow that we use here, and this is one of them, but we actually use a couple. And there's a couple that have a whole lot of value to us as an organization. The first one that I'm going to show you is actually our onboarding workflow. So like I said, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And our onboarding workflow would include many of the processes I think that are common to most organizations, where we have to go through, verification processes, get the person a computer, set the person up with an office, try to schedule lunch, those sorts of nice things that make employees feel welcome. And I'll also go through some of the ins and outs of the K2 piece as well. So here is our onboarding site. And as I mentioned in my kind of discussion just a second ago, the K2 work list are the My Tasks. The candidate onboarding, this is the list that I have created specifically for onboarding our candidate. So to enable this whole thing to happen, I kind of start in the administration screen for SharePoint, if you will. And I'm going to take a look at site settings. Actually, I take that back. I'm going to look at site contents. And the one thing you'll notice is Appit is added to my site, which was, right from the store. So if I go add an app, and I'm going to find K2, it's already added, so it's not here anymore. But I'm going to find K2, and I'm going to add it to my particular app. So this is enabled through getting this installed on my tenant and kind of setting up the license from my tenant. So now this is available to any site collection, any site on my Office 365 tenant. So that's kind of the first part to that. So any of the SharePoint lists that I create are ready to be apped, if you will, using Appit and K2. So if I go to my candidate onboarding list, and if I take a look at my list settings, right? If I take a look at my list and I look at my list settings, so here I can see the application elements and the reporting elements for this particular list. So we'll kind of start with the reporting elements. I've only entered a particular item in here, but you can kind of see that this particular workflow is still in progress. So this particular workflow is still in progress, and I can kind of see that trending over the last few days. Go back to the list. And I'll just kind of start by showing you some of the forms that we've built using the tool. So my candidate onboarding form is a smart form, and it includes not only the details for the candidate, but also any attachments for the candidate. For example, in this instance, it would be their resume. So I can add their full name, select their hire date, title, an email that I can reach that particular person, their particular practice. And again, the practice column is coming from a lookup field, so organizationally, if my practices change, then my practice column will change automatically as well. It's not something that is, hard-coded, if you will. It's coming from a lookup. Reports to, their particular status, and, a cell phone. And like I say, I can add attachments, and so now when I look at the candidate information, I have their basic information as well as any attachments that are relevant to that particular candidate. So I'm going to save. The workflow is going to kick off, and my work list will update to reflect the tasks that are affiliated with my user ID for this particular candidate. It's taken a second, of course, because everybody is watching. Okay, so here's the first task in terms of the workflow process that we had set up. And there's a couple of different things I can do here. I can look at the form. So if I click on Send Candidate Offer, it's going to give us all of the candidate information as well as the workflow information as well. So if I need to update the candidate information, for example, I can do that on the bottom half of this form. If all I need to do is respond to keep the workflow going, I'm just going to close out of here. I can use my Actions menu right on the activity item and say, okay, I've sent the offer. And so off it goes, and it's going to continue with the workflow process. Again, I'm just going to kind of refresh here. And it brings up the next task, which is affiliated with me. This is also sending email notifications, which are optional. I can send email, I cannot send email. Based on my own experiences with workflow, I think key emails during the process are great. I think that if you have too many emails, it gets a little bit spammy and people just start ignoring it, which is why I really like this particular view. Because not only can I see the candidates in process, but I can also see what I'm responsible for. It shows me exactly who the candidate is that I'm processing, and I can respond right here. So, and it continues and continues and continues. I'm just going to hit decline to complete the workflow. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hit accepted. We'll just kind of go through another few screens. So I'm going to hit it accepted. Again, the workflow continues and continues and continues, but now we can kind of get a little bit more visibility to what this workflow actually looks like. So one of the neat things I can see from this particular screen is I can see the flow. So I'm going to click on View Flow, and it's going to show me exactly where the candidate is in terms of our overall workflow. So I can see, I'll give you 2 seconds here. All right, so I can see the steps that have happened and basically the route that wasn't taken. So start the workflow, set data fields for the particular list, prepare the offer, and I'll go into the edit screens for these. Prepare the offer is sent, the item was accepted, so we go into the accepted tree. So this is where we start getting the documents going, start the e-verify process, start candidate processing with background checks and such, start the IT stuff, get their laptop set up, get their user account set up, so on and so forth. The red will indicate, you know, an alternative path, but in this case, the offer was not declined, it was accepted. But you can kind of see here, if it was declined, then we send an internal email and kind of go on for there. So that is the workflow view. Also from here, you can see any comments that users have submitted in terms of processing the workflow items, which is nice. Any attachments to the workflow. So again, if additional documentation has been submitted during the workflow process, you see it here. And then of course the charts, we go back to the particular chart and we can kind of see how long each step is taking. You know, and then these were all pretty easy. Now I'm preparing the document, starting the process, and so on and so forth. So you always have visibility into the status of the workflow, what's outstanding, so on and so forth. And like I say, from here we can complete things very easily and kind of move on with our day. So it's easy for all the parties who are involved with onboarding a new candidate to be privy to what's going on, to be notified as to when their tasks are due, and to be, you know, to be able to complete those tasks very quickly. So it's super cool. I'm going to kind of take a little check here. How are everyone doing? Any questions? Awesome. So let's kind of take a look at some of the designer screens. So if I go into my candidate onboarding, and as I mentioned, I'm going to get to the K2 items through the application area, or, you know, we looked at the reports already. So I'm going to go get to K2 through the application area, and I'll start to see what the designers look like for the various objects that are related to this particular K2 app. And we'll look at the different types as well. So candidate onboarding, attachments, offer status, practice, and status. These are all called smart objects. In terms of SharePoint, these could be lists or libraries. They can also be objects that are external to SharePoint. So for example, if this is something that I'm getting through SQL Azure, this is something that I'm getting through Excel services. Maybe it's something that I'm getting, you know, through a third-party web service, and I want to integrate that into my SharePoint, or I'm sorry, my K2 workflow. The smart object is the data from that source, and you're bringing that data into the process, and you can use it throughout your entire workflow. So if I look at my candidate onboarding smart object, for example, and I'll just hit edit, I can see that this is here it comes. So this is actually coming from SharePoint, and it gives me my SharePoint fields, which I can take, you know, as is, content type, full name, hire date, position, department, so on and so forth, or I can edit that and I can update it to some other type of data. So maybe it is a memo or a multi-value or whatever the case might be, and edit the information that way. Again, with this particular smart object, I can also combine information not only from my SharePoint list. If I click add, I can combine information to the smart object and perhaps use it in the workflow without actually persisting it back to the SharePoint list. So that might be another object, or that might be an example of extending the SharePoint object beyond the basic data that you're receiving from the source. We also have views, which are part of the SharePoint, or part of the K2 app. So again, I kind of went back a little too far. If I go back to the app screen, I can see views. And so views, much like SharePoint views, are usually a subset of all of the items in a list, or in our turn, a smart object. So it's a subset of all of the items in a particular smart object, and we'll actually use a combination of views to build our forms. So for example, I have a display view, and the display view shows me my basic information for my particular candidate. The full name, the hire date, the position, and then now we get into some of the workflow statuses that you can see. The business cards are ordered, the office card is requested, parking requested, so on and so forth. So now we're getting back into not only the default information about the candidate, but kind of where they stand in terms of the workflow. Close out of there. And then the views, which are built on top of the smart objects, are a component of the forms. So for example, display candidate onboarding, if I edit my display candidate onboarding form, so when I click the display form, and I'll show you here in a second, when I click the display form, it's going to show me, again, the basic information and where they stand in terms of the onboarding workflow, along with their attachments. And where we use this is very similar to the way that we use the out-of-the-box forms from SharePoint. So if I click on Form Settings, I can attach my display form, my edit form, and my create form to my K2 Smart Forms versus using the default out-of-the-box SharePoint form. So you can kind of see that screen right here. Candidate onboarding, display candidate onboarding, or display, edit, create. That actually should be new. So new candidate onboarding and edit candidate onboarding. And so we have forms that are created for the CRUD events similar to those out-of-the-box forms, and I can just point those to K2 forms in lieu of out-of-the-box forms. Down at the very bottom is our workflow, and I just kind of want to show you the workflow design and how you can work with the different activities, the different paths, so on and so forth. So again, select my workflow, hit my edit button, and it's going to take me into Workflow Designer. Take a second here to kind of load up, and it shows me the various tasks in this particular workflow. So I have my start set data fields, and so again, just each one we configure. It takes us through a wizard. It's going to be linked to the send candidate offer task, and it's going to set basically my status for my candidate information. Right? And what that does in that particular example is sets up my workflow start, if you will. All of my user tasks, you'll notice, have the icon of a user, and here I can also set in this branch my outcomes, so offer sent, and then I can set my participants. So this one goes to the workflow originator. If I decide to notify my participants via email when they receive a work item, I can click on notify. I can go through the message. I can accept the default message, or I can customize the message. So any of my smart object fields that are created through K2, I can include in my notifications. And you can kind of see those here through my data fields, through my item references, through my workflow context, through my various smart objects that we've created. There are also several inline functions that you can include in your email messaging, other environment fields, mail server information, workspace, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of contextual information that you can include in email notifications, and those go off via your email client to whomever is responsible for the task. So I'm just going to hit cancel at this point. So that goes through the process. And there's, again, kind of there's looping. That's looping. For example, if you need to wait for a period of time, or you have a finite amount of loops, there's looping capabilities, and so on and so forth. And one of the powerful things, so I'm just going to kind of go through the capabilities of what we can do. So we have a whole lot of different types of activities that we can implement using the K2 workflow. We have our general workflow steps, and that's what's up here at the top. Our references, our placeholders, we can call a sub workflow, which is awesome. Set data fields. Set folio is our update of the task list, for example, send emails, and so on and so forth. Our user tasks, again, custom user task or just a user task. We have document, list item, libraries. Some of the cool ones under the sites, I can create a subsite from our K2 workflow, which is something that you can't do with the out-of-the-box workflows, and I'll get to that in a second. Update subsites, delete subsites, permissions. So I have complete control over sites using K2, and this is one of the things that we use in our new project creation process. We actually internally built another app that helps our project management team get the consultants ready for a new project, and it sets up a project site very similar to the one that we saw in the previous screen. But the workflow has the power to actually manage the sites for us based on our template. We have CRM capabilities, document set capabilities, Azure Active Directory capabilities, which are far above and beyond what we can get with SharePoint out of the box. I know that was a very quick overview of the designer, but I just wanted to kind of take you through a couple of the screens, just kind of to iterate. Once you have your tenant set up with K2, it's very easy to add it to any number of sites and site collections just through the add an app in your site settings. And now we can enable K2 for any list or library that we have here in SharePoint, as well as on the site as well. If you take that and compare it to SharePoint out of the box, well, what are the tools that we have for this type of work with SharePoint out of the box? Well, we have SharePoint Designer and we have InfoPath. So SharePoint Designer with the newest version is awesome because now we only have script view in our form design. So for developers, it's okay, but what that did was it kind of made it a little tougher for our power users that may or may not know HTML, XML, XSLT, which are really how those forms are built using SharePoint Designer. With Workflow Designer, we have a limited number of activities that come with SharePoint Designer and the Workflow Designer. A couple key that are missing that I just talked about are create a site. So you actually have to write something custom to use SharePoint Designer to create a site in Workflow. The other is call another workflow. And actually, I know there's a solution on Codeplex to do this, but in terms of maintenance, I think we'd rather support something that is a product versus something on Codeplex. But it is something that you have to get custom if you want to have a SharePoint workflow call a second workflow. The only thing I'll say about InfoPath is who knows what the heck is happening with InfoPath. We don't know, and we don't know what Microsoft, with all of the information that I've read, we're not sure quite what's going on with InfoPath. So, in terms of smart forms, looking for a solution in lieu of InfoPath might be something of value. Again, just to kind of reiterate, this is what I mean in terms of the SharePoint Designer form builder. That's what it looks like. So we don't have drag or drop. It's very, very difficult to combine data from multiple sources. And with Office 365, we don't have server-side code, we have client-side code. And so it's just, in terms of the time spent between the two, it's definitely worth a look in terms of how long it would take you to get a smart form up using multiple data sources versus a SharePoint Designer form using multiple data sources. And you might be very surprised at that disparity. So in conclusion, again, Valore partners in K2, you know, if you're looking at cost development or cost-effective solutions comparing to custom development, you might take a look at something like K2 with your SharePoint Office 365. It does allow you to roll out quickly compelling features, that low-hanging fruit that I was talking about, to drive user adoption and getting value out of your intranet. Everything is changeable. So if I have a change in my workflow process, I can easily go in there, edit, and redeploy that workflow process and use that across my organization. You know, take advantage of the platform services to not recreate the wheel. So I don't have to roll my own security. I don't have to roll my own data storage. It's all there. And what I'm doing is I'm leveraging the services that I've already invested in with Office 365. The one thing that I didn't show you, even on the K2 side, is it's also easy to take our application and deploy it to other environments. So let's say, for example, I have multiple subscriptions. One of the things I can do is I can take this whole application and I can package it up. So I can create a package out of this application and then I can deploy it somewhere else. And that makes, you know, kind of quick and easy work of, for example, moving from a dev tenant to a production tenant, or if you have multiple, rolling the same workflow forms, smart objects throughout your organization.